Kind of think of New York Harbor as a giant forest that's had all of its trees removed. What we're trying to do at Billion Oyster Project is restore some of that habitat, rebuild the ecosystem so that it can function and thrive as it used to. We operate a shell collection program at about 80 restaurants in Brooklyn and Manhattan, when restaurants are open, which of course is not now. But we use those shells for our restoration work. So the Lobster Place is a direct-to-restaurant seafood distributor. They collect the shells and then bring the shells to a depot in Greenpoint, where they're put in a roll-off container. And then once a month, those roll-off containers come out to Governor's Island and pour out the shells. In order to use them for restoration, they have to be out of the water for a year. And that's because we don't want to introduce any animals or pathogens from other places into New York Harbor. So they stay out of the water for a year, and then we bring them into the lab. So we use those shells, we put them in a tank with the oyster larvae that we've grown. The larvae swim around and then attach to the shells. And so then they go from the hatchery out into the harbor at various reef sites. Estuaries are the most productive ecosystems on the planet and are often sort of overlooked because typically most estuaries have giant cities built on them, like New York. And New York Harbor is roughly the same area as the land area of New York City, and it used to be this incredibly productive and biodiverse place. After Europeans settled in New York, they removed all the oysters. Every environmentalist you ever talk to has some foundational story where they, fell in love with nature or learned to advocate for nature. And without those stories, you don't have that connection. How do you teach creative problem solving without complex problems to solve creatively? Restoring 1 billion oysters to New York Harbor is a great challenge. We don't know the best way to do it, and we're relying on thousands of teenagers throughout New York City to help us figure it out. Oyster reefs can be part of an integrated solution to protecting New York from climate change. Oyster reefs will not solve the climate problem, but they can play a role in protecting the shoreline from storms. The other thing that our reefs do to address the climate challenge is by connecting people to the natural resource and educating communities in New York City about the impacts of climate change, how tides, storms, currents work, why New York City is vulnerable, and what they can do about it. Fundamentally, if we want to move the big needle of greenhouse gas emissions, the only way to do that is millions and millions of people to change how they think and act every day. New York Harbor is too polluted to be a safe place to harvest oysters. But that's not the only reason you can't eat them. The main reason you can't eat them is because it's a restoration project and the oysters have an important role to play in rebuilding the ecosystem. We hope that people in New York City get to the point where they identify their local natural resources as an ecosystem worth preserving and protecting and appreciating. We think people are better off living near lots of animals. You can see, hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers leave New York City to go find nature, and they have this premier natural resource at their doorstep that no one's taking advantage of. So we think that when you go over the Brooklyn Bridge or the Manhattan Bridge on your way to work, you should be looking down at seabirds and dolphins and fish breaking the surface of the water and everything that used to what you would have seen 400 years ago looking at the harbor.